Hey guys, please try to bear with me here. I don't have iMovie on my computer and I'm not very technologically advanced, so this was the best I could come up with. This being an iMovie from my phone of a PowerPoint on my computer. So here's to hoping it works well enough. All right, on we go to my presentation, Liminal Protagonists and the Process of Individuation in Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. Jeanette Winterson's novel Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit has inspired many critics to write about things such as gender, sexuality, religion, and the ways in which these three things intertwine throughout her life. It has been called a coming-out novel, a coming-of-age novel, a religious novel, a mother-daughter novel, and it has been read by many through a well-earned feminist lens. Laura Bollinger, in particular, puts Oranges in conversation with its biblical subtext, particularly with the biblical character of Ruth, and also looks more specifically at the mother-daughter relationship at play in the novel. Bollinger writes, Winterson's novel complicates the maturation narrative of the protagonist Jeanette by insisting that she also come to grips with her role in a Pentecostal evangelical church that inspires her to public ministry yet rejects her words because she is a woman and a lesbian. Here, Bollinger touches upon something that is yet to be explored regarding Winterson's novel, the liminal space in which Jeanette finds herself as she transforms from the obedient puppet her mother intends her to be into her own actualized self. In her paper, The Becoming of Pinocchio, The Liminal Nature of Collodi's Boy Toy, Anna Ponsichik outlines the four different definitions of the word becoming and explores the strange space in which Carlo Collodi's title character from The Adventures of Pinocchio exists, a specific liminal space in between being an inanimate object and a living subject. She goes on to explain that this liminal existence is a type of neither nor both state that animated things can often occupy. It's important to note that a crucial difference between Pinocchio and Oranges is that one is fantasy and the other is realism. Of Pinocchio, Ponsichik writes, this story is about the becoming and forming of an identity, and then, finally, being that identity. And in terms of this animated toy story, the journey also has a strictly linear relationship between the states. It is about an improvement, working toward a goal, and moving from one stage to the next in order to reach the ultimate prize, being a human boy. Here, Ponsichik emphasizes that the story is a linear journey of improvement. However, unlike many fantasy stories, real human stories are rarely ever strictly linear. Ponsichik observes that it is that coming, that movement from one state of being to another state of being, which not only reinforces the idea that the animated plaything occupies a liminal state that is temporary and thus not permanent, but that also reinforces the idea that such a liminal state looks human. The question becomes, then, how does becoming function in a realistic novel in which the liminal state must be human? By expanding the definition of becoming away from improvement and toward a process of individuation, more specifically, a separation of the created from the creator, one can apply Ponsichik's narrative of becoming to Winterson's novel. Jeanette's journey throughout the novel is one of individuation, of navigating that liminal space between the Jeanette who exists as an extension of her creator, her mother, and the Jeanette that emerges as her own actualized self. It is therefore a novel of becoming, particularly as it pertains to Ponsichik's third and fourth given definitions, that which is coming into existence and a coming to be, a passing into a state. However, Orange's status as realistic fiction ultimately means that, although she achieves individuation, the becoming process for Jeanette is eternal, and that her existence in a liminal state is permanent. Winterson's novel invites an exploration into the creator-created dynamic and into the process of individuation, not only through the foregrounding of religion, but also by including implicit references to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The first reference arrives in the first chapter titled Genesis. My mother, out walking that night, dreamed a dream and sustained it in daylight. She would get a child, train it, build it, dedicate it to the Lord. While not explicit, the idea of building a human immediately brings Shelley's novel to mind, and the inference is strengthened at the end of Chapter 3, Leviticus, during one of the novel's tangents into the fantastical in which a prince searches for perfection. And he pulled from his pocket a leather-bound book. I don't know if it's up your street. It tells you how to build a perfect person. It's all about this man who does it, but it's no good if you ain't got the equipment. It's a bit weird, continues the old man. This geezer gets a bolt through the neck. Again, there is a reference to building a person, combined with the detail about getting a bolt through the neck, leaving little doubt that the story being offered to the prince is Frankenstein, or at least some version of it. In regards to narratives of becoming, Frankenstein acts as a natural bridge between the adventures of Pinocchio and Oranges, because while Pinocchio concerns the becoming of an inanimate object into a real boy, and Oranges depicts an entirely human transformation, Frankenstein offers something in between, while also acting as a mirror to Jeanette's story. These passages therefore illustrate the connection Jeanette feels to a known literary character that exists in a liminal space due to his relationship with his creator. Both Frankenstein's creature and Jeanette struggle with their existences as created beings, and the liminal space is given shape as they begin to examine their lives as separate from their creators. The first chapter of Oranges is titled Genesis, evoking the creation of the world by God, and it is in this chapter that Jeanette first describes her being built, echoing the creature in Frankenstein whom Victor had with such infinite pains and care endeavored to form. Jeanette's mother's infinite pains and care are described as singing to the child and stabbing the demons as she raises her child. Already, both Frankenstein and Jeanette are liminal creatures. Neither has a definitive parent, but rather a creator that attempts to form a perfect being, and further, a being made in their own image. Honchik describes the third definition of becoming, that which is coming into existence, and explains that it only applies to the transformation of the material body into another body, as one physical form becomes another. Frankenstein's creature mirrors the character of Pinocchio in the sense that there is a dimension of physicality to his liminal existence. Different parts of various material bodies are formed into another material body, but his existential crisis that drives the novel is more closely related to Jeanette's liminality, in that it concerns the soul rather than the body. However, the body still has a part to play in the individuation of Jeanette. While the creature comes to his individuation through the act of reading, specifically through John Milton's Paradise Lost, Jeanette comes to hers through the act of sex. Interestingly, the creature in Frankenstein finds a connection with the character of Satan, saying, "Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition," while Jeanette has a hallucinatory conversation with a demon that appears to represent her newly confronted sexuality, and when she asks it, "If I keep you, what will happen?" the demon replies, "You'll have a difficult time." Both characters, in their own way, wrestle with demons, and through this struggle, they achieve individuation from their creators. Jeanette's sexuality plays the biggest role in her individuation, which echoes the existence of Pinocchio before he is recognized as existing. Ponchicik writes, "Clearly the spirit of Pinocchio, never mind that piece of wood, seems to have been present prior to being recognized or even heard from by Master Cherry. The boy existed in the wood even before it was carved to resemble or to behave like a child. Jeanette's sexuality is similarly always present." From the beginning, Jeanette rebels against the idea of a heteronormative life as evidenced when she ruminates on Pastor Finch and thinks, "How did Mrs. Finch live with him? Then I remembered the gypsy. You'll never marry. That might not be such a bad thing after all." Her assertion that she wouldn't mind not marrying is inherently a rejection of heteronormativity because that's the only kind of marriage she's grown up to know about thus far. This is a piece of Jeanette that grows throughout the novel, the piece of her that acts as a wedge between who she is as her mother's creation and who she really is. The same gypsy that tells Jeanette that she will never marry also tells her, "You'll never be still," both linking movement to her sexuality and foreshadowing her constant movement, her constant becoming as she moves through the liminal space toward individuation. Jeanette's love affairs take place within the liminal space, both spiritually and physically, and these affairs are what ultimately lead to her individuation. As Laurel Bollinger writes, Jeanette's major love affairs with both Melanie and Katie occur because of Jeanette's evangelizing. Her lovers are converts she has won to the Pentecostal Church. Even as she discovers one of the truest parts of herself, she does so in the physical space of the church to which she has been promised by her mother, her creator. In falling in love with Melanie, she effectively becomes in the sense that she discovers her own self separate from her mother. After Jeanette's first sexual encounter with Melanie, Winterson writes, "And it was evening, and it was morning, another day," once again invoking a kind of creation, this time a creation of Jeanette by Jeanette. Of the fourth definition of becoming, Ponchik writes, "It is this becoming which Pinocchio most fully satisfies because his coming to be is about his existence in a liminal state. Jeanette's individuation is achieved at the expense of her entering into an existence of liminality. She is now in a betwixt and between moment where one can be neither nor both." Pinocchio's status as speculative fiction, and more specifically as toy fiction, leads the title character's becoming to a certain finality. Finally, Pinocchio, no longer in the threshold state, is then also no longer in the state of permanently becoming, and so the story concludes. He has finally become something, a proper boy. On the other hand, Jeanette, due to the necessary limitations of reality, cannot become something finished. Rather, even as she achieves individuation and becomes her own person, she remains in a state of becoming because she remains in the liminal space, unable to make a clean break from the threshold state. As Laura Bollinger writes, in returning to her mother at the conclusion of the novel, Jeanette acknowledges that relationships continue even after one goes away. She chooses to continue the relationship with her mother in person rather than only through memories and resentments. Although Jeanette has become her own person, her individuation, like Shelley's creatures, is complicated by her return to her creator at the end, reinforcing the nonlinearity of her becoming and indicating that she still exists in that liminal space between mother's creation and self. Jeanette reiterates this lack of linearity when discussing stories in the chapter Deuteronomy. Some people say there are true things to be found. Some people say all kinds of things can be proved. I don't believe them. The only thing for certain is how complicated it all is, like a string full of knots. It's all there, but hard to find the beginning and impossible to fathom the end. Jeanette's story, unlike Pinocchio's or even Frankenstein's, has no clear beginning or end. It is always in that liminal space. However, this doesn't mean there is no movement for Jeanette once she has achieved individuation. It simply means the movement is not always forward and that the becoming is never complete. Whereas Pinocchio moves toward the correct way of living, moving away from a boy who breaks all the rules to a proper boy, Jeanette moves sideways through her liminality, moving from a proper girl in her mother's eyes towards being a girl who breaks all the rules and defies the status quo. This can be seen as a movement away from Panchizik's second definition of becoming, that which is befitting or proper. While Pinocchio fulfills each definition of becoming that Panchizik provides, Jeanette complicates the word by remaining in the liminal space. Applying Panchizik's definitions of becoming to a realistic novel ultimately means the definitions must expand to encompass a nonlinear narrative. Furthermore, Panchizik argues that a significant difference between a traditional Bildungsroman narrative and a Bildungsroman for material culture is that the interstructural situation or liminal space for a thing can itself be made permanent. Winterson's novel complicates this idea that the liminal space cannot be permanent in a traditional Bildungsroman. At the novel's end, Jeanette, the protagonist, still navigates a liminal space in which she is neither nor both her mother's creation and herself. Even the structure of Oranges invites liminality, since it is a fictionalized account of the author's own life. Therefore, it is neither nor both true and fictitious. The novel, like Jeanette, exists in the liminal space, and it is that space in which the reader is directed to stay fixated. Thank you.